Good evening or morning or afternoon, whatever it is for all of you. It is 3 a.m. for me, so excuse my everything. We are super excited today. We've got Pinoy BL, an introduction to Filipino boys' love with Mikki, and so excited. Um, that's all I've got. Mikki, do you want to do an introduction or anything?
I'll just do it in the disclaimer part. I mean, I inserted some Filipino entertainment memes here. So I guess, yeah, they were gonna relate. The disclaimer is so funny. I think Pia already has an idea.
All right. Well, let's
Yeah, and
get
I'm
started.
so excited to explain the concept of paminta. So get your pepper shakers ready. All right, so thank you very much for tuning into my panel. It's 3 a.m. in Dallas, right? 3 a.m. And it's 4 p.m. here in Manila. So I'm very glad that you still stayed up even at this ungodly hour on a Sunday. Anyway, as you can see here on the screen, my panel will be about Pinoy BL. So it is an introduction to Filipino boys love. So I need to introduce myself first, of course. So my name is Paul, but on Twitter and Wattpad, they call me Mikki. So I've been an anime and manga fan since college. So that was more than a decade ago. And I've been writing Filipino BLs on Wattpad on that same period. So one of them has been printed in commercial print in 2018. So nowadays I'm not really that writing because it's the pandemic and I'm working at home. But whenever I have time, I read BL novels, I read BL comics, and more recently, for the sake of this panel, I've been watching Filipino BL web series as well. So I cannot really say that I'm a proud Pinoy because I haven't really watched Game Boys till like a month ago. Anyway, I'll go to the disclaimer first so that everyone is aware. Okay, it's not moving. Here go. So as you can see, this panel is not written from the perspective of of an academic or a fan. So I'm not Dr. Thomas, I'm not Kristen. So I'm just a Pinoy BL writer. So I'm most of the slides that you're gonna see are from the perspective of someone observing the Pinoy BL scene locally. So it's also not web series centric. So I apologize if some of you may be expecting that I'll be talking about Game Boys, but I'll be talking about the scene in general, not just the web series. And also, it's not exhaustive because the fandom is growing wildly fast, especially during COVID 19. And I have to play this audio first.
This program is rated SPG. It contains scenes with themes, language, violence, sex, horror, or drugs, which may not be suitable for children. Strong parental guidance is
All
advised.
right, thank you very much, MTRCV, for that trigger warning. I mean, this is a Filipino meme because in the Philippines, the censors do not rate shows based on age, but trigger warnings instead. So you got 6 letters that show on your TV screen, and when you see that letters, you already know, they're gonna have a sex scene here or something. Yeah, I have other Filipino memes inserted here. I'm glad you appreciated that SPG meme. Maybe we can make a merch out of it. Anyway, so here's what the panel will be about. So the first half, I'm gonna define what is Pinoy BL and what is Pinoy BL before it became BL. So you're gonna have an idea about queer media in the Philippines before BL existed. And then what makes Filipino BL unique from other forms of BL, as well as its three main forms, which are novels, comics, and web series. And then for the next part, I'm gonna show you how do we consume Pinoy BL here in the country and how do you start when you're overseas. And then you're gonna see some common tropes and popular stars. So I'm gonna show you a few clips and screenshots here and there. And then what are the challenges Pinoy BL face and why do I say that Pinoy BL is a fandom in cellos? And then some closing remarks and some wish lists for the fandom once we emerge out of this pandemic. So how do I define Pinoy BL? So at its core, it's not different from any kind of BL. So they are stories that feature romantic and sexual relationships between men. They are made by Filipinos in the Philippines, and they are mainly written in the Filipino language. So if you notice the asterisk, I put that on purpose because when I was doing this panel slides, I felt that my definition will not be clear cut or as inclusive as I want it to be. You're gonna realize that once you see the history of Pinoy BL. So let's start with what we call the bold movies era. So during the 80s until early 2000s, there was this time in Philippine cinema that is so liberal, you're gonna have basically soft porn with plot in cinemas all around. Even the most mainstream ones will air that. And once in a while, they're gonna sneak in these queer titles that have male ex-male relationships, such as Macho Dancer, which appeared, I think, in the mid or late 80s. However, when the Catholic Church pressured the cinemas to stop airing R18 movies, so these movies went underground because they have lost their venues and they became what we call indie or independent cinema. So these are the kind of movies that meant to be art films basically. These are the kinds of stuff that you're gonna watch if you're studying at a liberal university or a film festival like Cinemalaya or Cinema One Originals. So the two posters on the right are some examples of that. Like Ang Pagdadalaga ni Maximo Oliveros, or in English, The Blossoming of Maximo Oliveros. So as you notice, there is a policeman there. So it was on purpose. It's part of the plot. So you just check it out on IMDb. I think it will be very relatable to Americans, especially in the social climate that they have right now. And then we got here Too Cool to Be Forgotten. So this aired in 2016. So that's around 3 to 4 years before Pinoy BL boom. And it was directed by Peterson Vargas. So if you're familiar with Peterson, he directed several Pinoy BLs such as Hello Stranger. And then even before the Pinoy BL era, there were already anthologies, novels, and even comics that feature LGBT men and relationships. So one of the most popular authors of that era is Danton Remoto. He is a professor, an activist, and he actually founded a political party called Ladlad, which is roughly in Filipino coming out. So it's labeled was as the first Filipino LGBT team political party, or maybe the first LGBT party in the world. So these kinds of books are something that you would expect from a highbrow English-speaking publisher or maybe a university press. For comics, though, it's a bit different because just like comics in other parts of the world, they start indie or independent, even doujin-like content. So Shasha Saturna here, the cover with a superhero-like design is pretty unique because it got a lot of traction outside its in the comic scene that it got a movie and a stage play. It was pretty popular during the 2000s. I would say that if we follow the definition of Pinoy BL I propose, they would qualify as BL works. But on the Japanese or Western kind of sense, it wouldn't fit in. Because if I'm going to argue that they're BL, I would imagine some people would follow me with pitchforks and they're going to cancel me figuratively or literally or otherwise. So I would just call it queer literature straight out. But in a parallel world, there was a budding BL scene online. So if you're familiar with Wattpad, I know in the West, Wattpad doesn't have a good reputation. But in the Philippines, Wattpad is a household name. Like every other teenager who grew up in the 2010s know Wattpad. They've been addicted to Wattpad novels. And of course, since it's a novel writing site, you would also expect that there will be queer literature on it. This is what we call as boy x boy or BXB. So these are novels that are written in Filipino, and they got a lot of appeal because in the mid 2010s, this was the time when the internet has just started to become a household necessity. Kids just got their first smartphones, and Wattpad is free of charge. So you don't have to pay for any of the novels, and it's very accessible. And it's also free in a sense that there's no editors. You just post your drafts on Wattpad and you just pray to God that they will like it because no one proofread your work. However, I would say that it did not really benefit much from the Wattpad boom in the Philippines back in around 2015 to 2019 because it's an underground genre. Like publishers and TV stations and film outfits would rather produce heterosexual romances. So these stories didn't get a lot of attention, including mine, sadly. Someone please send links for possessive stepbrother. I can send you one, but they're in Tagalog, so I doubt you're gonna understand it. Sorry, but I'm gonna put some interesting links on the community rec sheet. I actually put some already. All right, and then next, I'm not sure if you have heard about My Husband's Lover, but if you're familiar with Mexican or any South American telenovelas, you're gonna get what My Husband's Lover is because it has a lot of these Latin American tropes, except that two of the characters are queer. So this is the first Philippine telenovela that featured a male ex-male pairing. However, it did not really earn much for the network that produced it. I mean, I admired that they attempted to make a series such as this, and it got a lot of attention even. But I mean, if you're a TV station that depends on sponsors, of course, sponsors will not gonna sponsor something rated as PG as this. So it's more like an advocacy piece for GMA network back then, rather than like a money-making machine, I'd say. Though they followed this one with a lesbian theme series, maybe I should post that one on the rec sheet as well. But they did not really follow it up by another title, sadly. Yeah, Dennis Trillo, he's a great actor, by the way. Yep. And then, if you're familiar with Game Boys, I would have to correct that Game Boys is not the first Filipino BL web series. So the first one is actually what we call Hanging Out back in 2016. So this was produced by a magazine called Team. However, it did not really get that much attention, even though it was featured on CNN as the first Filipino gay web series. It was a bit controversial even because its first episode was censored on YouTube, and they were forced to upload it on Facebook, which is kind of funny because Facebook just censors content as maybe much worse than YouTube even. But the first episode is already available on YouTube again. So go check it out if you're interested because it's pretty unique, I'd say. And the first episode is very funny. So now that you know the history of Pinoy BL, so what makes Pinoy BL different from any kind of BL? I'd say it's not much. I mean, at its core, it's still male romances, but it's also way different. You're gonna consider the history of the Philippines first. So to understand Pinoy BL, you need to understand the country's history. So historians often summarize the Philippines as 300 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. But I would also add two moments in Philippine history, which was the invasion by Japan in World War II. So we were 4 years a sex slave. And then we got nominal independence from the US after the war in 1946. But a dictator came in. His name is Ferdinand Marcos, if you're familiar. So we were a hippie 20 years in jail. So that was a very sad moment. But it was also the moment where I'd say Philippine civil society developed and they got aware about their rights. So that influences Philippine politics and culture even today. So such history makes the Filipino audience complicated but interesting. So you got religious influences. 81% of Filipinos are Catholic, and then you got 11% that are what we call born again. Anyone that is Christian but not Catholic. So anyone attending an American style Protestant, Baptist, Pentecost, or whatever you call that kind of church. So Philippine society is socially conservative, but also very hypocritical. I mean, abortion is illegal, divorce is illegal, there's no same-sex marriage, but in private, people do not really practice what they preach. They do not, I mean, let's say whatever the priest tells you at mass, it goes on one ear and then it goes outside the other. And also considering the Spanish influence, the Philippines is a weird society because you got this Latin American society in the middle of Southeast Asia where our neighbors are either Buddhist influence like Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and probably Singapore. Then you got these Muslim countries such as Indonesia and Malaysia. And then you got this Catholic, pretty liberated society called the Philippines. And also the American influence also has a role because many Filipinos have at least some proficiency in English. And also, if you're doing like a customer service call, chances are someone in the Philippines is handling a call from, let's say, your telco or your energy company. We have a lot of call centers here. And also, I gotta add the influence of what we call overseas Filipino workers. So there's a lot of waves of migration from the Philippines to other countries. And so I would say that Philippine society is increasingly educated, cosmopolitan, and multicultural even. I mean, the typical OFW kid who has parents abroad will become the first person in the family to have a college degree. And when you go to college, you would expect that you will be exposed to a liberal kind of education. You're gonna learn what LGBT is about. You're gonna learn about feminism and so on. So kids these days are more and more exposed and to these, I would say in the Philippines, sense radical ideas. And media influences are more diversified as well. Like as late as 20 years ago, a Filipino's typical entertainment diet would be either American shows or Mexican telenovelas. But now you get more and more audiences that are hooked into East Asian shows, such as BL. I would say it's partly inferiority complex and partly curiosity as well because these are our neighbors like Japan, Korea, China, Thailand. They have highly developed economies and people are curious how they are living their lives and they are aspiring that the Philippines will be something that they are proud to see on TV and on cinema. So that goes into BL fandom in the Philippines as well. So you got Japanese yaoi, Korean webtoon, you got danmei, and then most recently you got Thai BL. Though I would say that even though that Pinoy BL is booming very recently, I mean, it's an open secret that Pinoy BL is a fad. So we can argue that Pinoy BL is came to existence because producers are just wanting to ride on the Thai BL boom. So before the first lockdown in Manila, together the Thai BL series was trending. So you would expect that Filipino movie and TV productions would follow suit, but I did not expect that they would do that so fast and in the middle of the lockdown even. So you got these first batch of shows that are about lockdowns. They are using Zoom calls as an excuse to shoot. You may ask me more details later during the question and answer why there's a lot of Zoom calls in Pinoy BL. I would explain how lockdowns work in the Philippines. But I guess now the production of Pinoy BL has slowed significantly, probably because those who have rushed to produce BL shows got burned. They lost a lot of money. And anyone who had survived, they're taking advantage of the more loosened restrictions now. So they are now shooting stuff more professionally. And I would have to say that unlike when you hear about Thai BL, Korean BL, yaoi, you would know that these are boys' love in their respective languages. But Pinoy BL doesn't work that way because there are many creators that speak English as their first language, or maybe they just grew up speaking English and they are taking advantage of a wider international audience. However, for the web series part, I would argue that the reasons are more capitalism than anything. Because obviously, if they gonna if upload it on YouTube and you have people watching it from overseas, you're gonna have more advertising income. Oh, okay. I'm glad that people know Life in Orange. I'm gonna feature that later. And this last slide, I seeing a lot in the chat saying that Pinoy BL is woke. It's true. So I know in the West, BL fans may be busy arguing about fetishization, representation, or whatever woke terms that I'm not familiar with. But it's hard to accuse Pinoy BL like that because many of its creators are LGBTs themselves. I need to emphasize that the entertainment industry in the Philippines might be the only few industries where LGBT people are welcome and accepted, at least until like 2010s. So you're gonna expect that there are many writers and directors that are either out or in the closet. So by using these telenovela tropes sprinkled with East Asian influences, Pinoy BL is presented both as entertainment and advocacy. So if you're gonna start with Pinoy BL, you will be surprised how deep the topics are. They are not floppy BLs. Someone said that on the chat. So you're gonna see scenes such as coming out, debates how to be a good ally, gender roles, or even HIV. So one of the most famous creators of Pinoy BL is Juan Miguel Severo. So if you have watched Gaya sa pelikula or like in the movies in English, you're gonna know why I featured Juan Miguel Severo. Because he's like one of the most activist BL writers around. And his fandom is also very activist. Like I'm sharing screenshots on Discord. There were Gaya sa pelikula fans that are saying that, hey, we need to remove President Duterte so that we have Gaya sa pelikula season 2. And I was having the laugh of my life. Anyway, let's go to the next part. So we got here the three main forms of Pinoy BL. So these are novels, you got comics, and you got web series. So I know some of you are already familiar with the web series part, but Pinoy BL is not web series centric. Novels and comics have started to appear way before web series. So I'll feature novels first. So these are probably the most low-key among the bunch. So sadly, none of them have been printed in English at the moment. So whatever that has been licensed from Wattpad, they are in Filipino. But you may encounter some Pinoy BLs that are written in English. I've seen that on our local writers group, but I haven't checked them out yet. Oh, great. I have a bunch and can provide summaries. Please do, yeah. Post it on the community sheet. So most of these titles came from a company called Precious Hearts Romances. So if you're Filipino, you will grow up with Precious Hearts because they're like the Harlequin of the Philippines. So if you're familiar with that teen romance novels, that's the Filipino equivalent, Precious Hearts. But they have started to print LGBT novels lately on an imprint called Pridelit. But interestingly, if you're gonna check out a Pridelit book, they do not label their works as BL. They're just gonna say out it's an LGBT novel. And then you got a sister imprint called Black Ink, which is unlike Pridelit. They are like Japanese manga inspired, so they deliberately label their comics and novels as BL. And then you got here other publishers such as Bookware, Psycom, and Summit Media. They have published at least one Pinoy BL novel, but I doubt they're gonna follow up with another one anytime soon. Then outside of it, you got self-published novels. So some authors will volunteer to print, as in print literal paper, their books, and then they're gonna sell it to their fans, like Kickstarter or something. But I doubt it's profitable on their part. Yeah, I'm gonna feature capture in the next slide. So we got here some Filipino BL novels in print. So it's interesting if you're gonna check the the covers, they seem to be very much Japanese manga inspired. But some of them, for example, Nina Satomi's Red Grapes Young Love and Other Superstition, this is more American pocketbook influence. It's like reading a YA actually. I met the author in a workshop. Then you got your Soju's Bro. If you're familiar with the Harlequin kind of romance novels, it's like that because Soju writes heterosexual romances and he also writes LGBT novels on the side. And then you got here the Royal Engagement, which is inside. It's like a Japanese light novel. So you got the text and then you got illustrations every page or two. So I got a copy of this, by the way. Yeah. Why I'm being asked to admit people. Anyway, let's go to the comics part. Okay, let's see. Here we got BL comics. So if you're gonna try to find BL comics in commercial print, most likely they only came from one publisher. So that is Black Ink. That's the publisher I mentioned on the previous slide. However, chances are you're gonna encounter a lot of Pinoy BL comics at comic festivals locally, such as Comiket. There, I forgot this one event that I think it's Comic Con, yeah. That's the title. It's either Comiket or Comic Con. And then you also find some indie titles online on aggregators such as PenLab, which I just discovered very recently while preparing this panel. So there are also some comics that exist as webtoons, such as Life in Orange, this one on the right side. So as you notice, it seems that just like BL novels, they are both influenced by Japanese manga and Western comics, but the plots are very local. So I'm gonna show you my personal BL comic collection. So here you go. I think I have like 30 to 40 of these. So these are not all the ones I got. The latest one I have here is Undercover, which when I saw, I laughed so hard because I thought, oh, it's a Fugo KG fanfic. I'm not really sure. It's a police type of BL. And then here below, there are several other BL comics. So you got here, Mga Walang Panahong Diyos ng Pag-ibig. In English, that's The Busy Gods of Love. So as you notice in the cover, it's unashamedly Bara, which I really love. And then you got here this interesting title called BTS, or Behind the Scenes. I have no idea if the creator is a fan of BTS. Maybe the title is a coincidence. And then I'm gonna feature this one on the left, on the rightmost side, that is Ode to Art. It's not labeled a BL. I'd say BL adjacent, but this is a very touching story. I would spoil the plot. I need to because one of the main characters has HIV. So it's a very interesting story. I thought if they're gonna translate these comics into English, it should be Ode to Art first. But sadly, their publishers are not really interested. They're not investing into translations. And then lastly, we got the web series part. So if you're watching Thai BL, of course you will know about Pinoy BL because that's their neighbor anyway. So it's what gave Pinoy BL its name. It's mostly available on YouTube, and then some titles are available on streaming platforms like Netflix or Gaga Ulala, if you're familiar with that. I would say that Pinoy BL web series scene is worse than Wild Wild West because you got TV stations, film productions, ad agencies, modeling studios, and even non-government organizations, they are producing Pinoy BL. So almost all of them are sub in English, and they are very easy to binge, like 6 to 13 episodes, just like your typical web series BL. And I think I have to update this because as of last count, there are more than 70 produced Pinoy BL web series so far. And I haven't even watched them all. And maybe I'm not even interested in watching them all even. Because if you're gonna see their posters, you're gonna have the laugh of your life. Okay, I skipped that one. Oops, I think I skipped the funny slide. Hold on. Oh, okay. It moved here. Let me just move. There you go. Yeah, this is not a con without technical problems. So here we got here very interesting covers. And I had the laugh of my life when I saw the poster for this one. It's called Camisetang Papel or Paper Shirt in English. I thought, hey, you're gonna need to pay a good graphic designer, maybe someone who's knowledgeable with Photoshop. This is a very awful poster. Yes, that's right. Graphic design is my passion, exactly. But you got here, other than that, you got here some very interesting plots. Someone was curious about the NGOBL, so it's called Got You Fam. So this was produced by an HIV testing provider called Love Yourself. So I plan to watch this after FujiCon because it's really interesting. Like they're mixing this healthcare advocacy with BL. And this is something that I haven't even encountered in other kinds of BL. So it's very interesting that in the Philippines, you got organizations that are very willing to mix their advocacy with entertainment. So how do you access Pinoy BL then? So sadly, even for locals, Pinoy BL is not really accessible. That's a sad fact. I mean, we got a bookstore monopoly in the country. That is called National Bookstore. So they control at least almost all of the bookstore market. And other than that, you got like a high-end competitor called Fully Book, which do not stock up on these mass market novels. So many BLs, apart from the web series that I mentioned, are not translated. That's why I cannot really give you the Wattpad links a while ago because you're not gonna understand it either way. So anything that is licensed are in literal paper. So they are in print. So they cost around 100 to 300 pesos. So that's in 2 to 6 US dollars. But I have to emphasize that in the Philippines, the minimum wage is $10 a day. So that's a day. So that's around $1.25 an hour. So of course, if you're gonna need to feed yourself and pay per house, you're not gonna think of buying books to entertain yourself. Yes, that's right. That's pretty expensive. So and also I need to mention that if you're a kid like a high school student, still dependent on your parents and you're starting to become a BL fan, if you want to order Pinoy BLs online, so there either be on these sites called Shopee and Lazada. So these are like the Philippine equivalents of Amazon. However, the quirk here is that even though, let's say you're a rich kid, you have money to buy Pinoy BL, you either need to have a credit or debit card, which of course you're gonna not gonna have because you're a minor, or you're gonna ask your parents to pay it for you cash on delivery. And then when they see the insides of the package and they see that it got BL on it, of course you're gonna get a scolding. And it's very rare for Pinoy BLs to have PDFs and EPUBs. I think there's only two. One of them is mine. Another one is the Bathroom Love Affair that I posted on the community rec and I featured on the novels part. But some of them, like on comics, I mean, like Life in Orange or My Crosswise Boyfriend or Ang Crosswise Con Jowa, you can find them on legal aggregators like PenLab. which is a Filipino webtoon site. However, they do not have an LGBT or even BL category. They do not label them as BL at the moment, which is sad because when I was reading Life in Orange, they categorize it as drama, which is pretty funny and pretty tragic, I'd say. So I went to the mall to check the situation. So this is my local national bookstore. So they were there to stock up on a girls' love or Yuri called Tibok. So this is a Filipino one. And then you got all of these heterosexual romances. But I did not see any BL novel inside. Luckily, I saw BL comics though. You got here captured. I think it's been here for around a year or more because it's the lockdown and the kids cannot go out, or maybe if they can go out, they have no money to spend anyway. And then here's the comic shop on their competitor called Fully Book, which they got 13. So if you have Netflix, you'll be familiar with 13 because it got an animated series, but they rarely stuck up on titles such as Black Ink or even the heterosexual novels from the imprint called Pop Fiction. So they're mostly the higher end English kind of stuff. And then if you want to read novels online, I mean, someone's asking me about Wattpad a while ago. The thing I'm angry about is that Wattpad doesn't have an LGBT category. So the workaround is that you're gonna change the app's language to Filipino and then type the keyword BXB. And then you're gonna see more than 8,000 stories that will pop up. But on their competitor site called Dreamy, they already have a dedicated BXB category in their homepage, which is pretty nifty. I love it. So now knowing that the novels and the comics parts are pretty much inaccessible for the local and international audiences, so how about we go with the web series instead? I mean, I already mentioned Game Boys. It's the most popular Pinoy BL. But I call it like your required reading, something that your professor would recommend that you read for your paper or a college exam. But as a fan, I would rather recommend you some other titles that you may have missed. So here's some. So in the rush to sift in all these Pinoy BLs, I got 6 titles that I like. So if Quarantines is one, I'm gonna squeal a lot about Quarantines. It's a smartly written web series because you got here two characters that are born again Christian. And if you're listening carefully, being born again Christian in the Philippines is tragic because if you're LGBT and you're born again Christian, chances are you're gonna be kicked out of your church, kicked out of your family, and you're gonna be condemned to hell. And then, like in the movies or gaya sa pelikula, I know I met a lot of Fujicon attendees that watched like in the movies and they really love it. It's professionally created, it's slickly written, and then you got a great director and you got a great writer. And then you got here in between. So this, I felt in between is like your typical Japanese yaoi. So you got one main couple and then you got another side couple. One of them is an otaku in the web series, which I really love. I love the side couple more than the main couple. Oh, oops, here. And then you got My Extraordinary, which is borrowing a term from the West. You got a school jock and a neurodivergent, a socially awkward guy. They fell in love with each other. And then you got Influencers, which isn't really great. It's not a great BL, but I love the writing because they deliberately wrote the characters to defy gender roles. One of the recurring jokes in Influencers is that the bottom is a really tall guy, which really defies people's expectations what okay would be. And then we got here Meet Me Outside, which is basically a product placement. It's sponsored by a dating app called Blued. So it's really short, but it's very lovely. It's also directed by Peterson Vargas, the one who directed Too Cool to Be Forgotten and Hello Stranger. So now that you know how to access Pinoy BL, I'm gonna I'm gonna guide you to some tropes that you will encounter. So of course, in BL we got Mpreg. In Pinoy BL, yes, we got Mpreg as well. But the interesting part in Pinoy BL is that it's not really connected to Omegaverse. It's like when I read Mpreg stories, it felt like the writers are in a pinch. They do not have any idea how to close their stories. So they would resort to the man being suddenly pregnant, like there's Harry Potter magic or something. But there are already some Mpreg stories that are Megaverse influenced, like this one I saw, which is LS1, The Kept Man. It already has 510,000 views on Wattpad, which is lovely. So I would say that as a BXB writer, it's a very divisive trope. Some love it, others hate it for perpetuating gender roles, which kind of makes sense because it felt like there are better ways to end a story than a pregnancy. It's as if you're saying that a relationship, whether it's a heterosexual or an LGBT relationship, would not be valid unless you're gonna create a family. But I mean, I cannot blame them because it's the Catholic influence, right? Catholic influence is pro-birth, so we cannot blame them. Yeah, there are better ways to end a story than with a pregnancy. And then here you go. I can I can sip some water now. So Pinoy BL, just like Thai BL, also has a lot of campus stories. So they are set in high school and college because I mean most of the writers just came out of college very recently, or in the case of Wattpad, they are still in school. So if you're familiar with Thai BL, you're gonna see that it's not really that different with Thai BL, but the plots are pretty unique. I mean, it's still rooted in the local context. So when you talk about campus stories, you're gonna feature all the strings like bullying, nerds and jocks, sports, all of the strings attached. So let's watch this scene from episode 1 of My Extraordinary.
Tol, men, laro lang to.
Iingot yan eh. Papasigat rin lang sa maling ring pasinut.
Mike, stop bullying him!
I'm not bullying him. Binubuli ba kita? Ha, Shake? Di ba away lalaki lang to?
Hindi ako naghahanap ng away. Nananahimik ako nanonood dun. Sinabi ko sa'yo hindi ako marunong maglaro ng basketball, di ba? Pero panilit mo ako maglaro.
Hala, Heaven, sunduin mo na nga tong sisteret mong kumakray lalo.
Wait, what?
Ano yan?
Hindi ako bakla. Hindi na ako marunong mag-basketball.
Masalamat kayo. Inawat nila ako kundin. Mas malalaman ang inabot ng mga pegi kayo. I see another spectrum of player. Sige, mag-retouch na kayo sa ladies room. Sinabi na tama na ba? Stoy, tama na. Tama!
Oh my gosh, I really love this scene. I mean, in the Philippines, we don't call the pairings ships. We call them love teams. So the love team here, which is here Shake and Ken. So in this scene, Shake is being bullied because he cannot play basketball properly. And if you're a Filipino boy growing up in the Philippines, you are expected by default to know how to play basketball, else chances are you're gonna be called gay by your own family and your own friends. So everyone is expected to know how to play basketball. So this scene is very relevant in the local context because, I mean, you would see Shake here being so mad that he's being blamed about the game, even though he doesn't know how to play basketball. And then you got here the guy who's throwing a lot of homophobic statements. And then what is surprising here is that Ken, which is the jock in the story, do not really know Shake at this point. But when he heard that his friends is saying too much homophobic statements already, he did not hesitate to punch the guy. So I really love this scene. Yeah, that's a strange gender stereotype. I mean, in other countries, you would expect men to learn soccer or football, but in the Philippines, it's basketball. Yeah. Okay.
Tol, men, laro lang.
Here, if you know Gaya sa Pelikula, I'm gonna talk about that because Gaya sa Pelikula is one of the typical BL tropes in the Philippines because the entertainment industry is in Manila, which is the capital and the richest city. And it's also the center of entertainment production. So if you're gonna watch Pinoy BL, chances are it was set by default to be in an upper middle class community in Manila. Some of them are different though. Like I think it's Better Days. There was this BL that was set in like a restaurant in the province. And then you got influencers, which was set up in a campsite in La Union, which is like the Jersey Shore of Manila, because you got rich people flocking there and swimming over the years. So let's play this scene from Gaya sa Pelikula.
Are you sure about this, ate?
Well, I would rather have you back home. Ang KJ ko naman if I deprive you of this, diba? And besides, I'm an ally and a socialist. Here. Not so fast. You know, Carl, I didn't lie when I said I'm a cool sister. But I also happen to be a fierce one. Alagaan mong kapatid ko. Ha? My brother's heart has been broken over by this boy.
Ate.
A boy too sweet to sweat a fly. I won't have that happening again to our bunso. Charo?
Yes po, Ate Judy.
Remember, no age. I'm
Okay, this
impressed.
scene is very lovely. I mean, if you're a Filipino, you would never dare to call yourself a socialist, especially in this political climate that we have. But Kaya sa Pelikula is a very activist title, so there's that. So I would explain here why the character Judith, without an H, I mean with an H, sorry, is writing a check. So in the Philippines, more than half of Filipinos do not have bank accounts. So if you have a bank account, chances are these are like these plastic ID card size ones, like debit cards, basically. But if you have a checking account, you might consider yourself rich because, in my experience, the bank would not issue you a check unless you have like high income, you have a credit card, or you have a business, or you're buying a house, which are pretty much upper middle class characteristics. So I found this scene very symbolic. And the plot of Gaya sa Pelikula really circles around these upper middle class tropes. Like Vlad, he's studying film, and there's only a few universities in the country that has film courses, and it's very expensive. I tried to study film class, and I learned that it would take you around, let's say, $20,000, I'd say, to finish your degree and to film your thesis project. Yeah, and then Judith here, she owns the apartment block where Vlad and Carl is living in the scene. And she was so ecstatic when she assumed that Vlad and Carl are a couple. And she immediately proceeded in writing a check because she's rich as fuck. And then here's the scene I want to feature. So it is not usual to Pinoy BL to feature coming out and homophobia. So there are scenes where the character explicitly comes out, or in the case of quarantines, it is implied, maybe post fact. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry if I've triggered some here. I'm gonna play this scene. This is around the near the ending of Quarantines.
Oh, Mom, what's up? Okay na kayo ni Judah?
I have to confess something. Remember when I told you not to get Judah? Well, my plan was to send him to a conversion retreat. Wala. Desperado na ako noon.
Oh my gosh, Mom! Why would you do that? Juju, anak, I'm so sorry. I had no idea.
Oh, no! Ako ang dapat mag-sorry sa inyong lahat. Kasalanan ko ito. Kaya lahat ng paraan ginagawa ko, guluhin ang buhay niyo. I'm sorry. Patawarin niyo ako, please. Ayokong tumanda na nag-iisa. Natatakot ako. Ang duwag-duwag ko. Ang hina. Please, patawarin niyo ako, please. I'm sorry. Nagmula ngayon, babaguhin ko na lahat, Judah. Suportado ko ang happiness mo.
Okay, this is a pretty long scene. So I'm gonna explain the plot of Quarantines. So Quarantines is a lockdown BL, which is like Game Boys, but what's different is that they shot all of the scenes in one apartment block or a flat. So the plot circles around Judah, which is the character talking to in the Zoom call. So it was the first set of lockdowns in the Philippines, and everyone was trying to get out of Manila. Everyone was trying to get back home to their families. But Judah decided not to go home to his grandmother because of this conversion retreat thing. So before, he was tricked into conversion therapy by his grandma, and he was so upset because he thought he could trust his grandma about stuff. And then he was tricked like that. And he was afraid that once he goes back to his grandma, he will be tricked into that again. So he decided he will just stay at the apartment block in the university dorm. So it's a pretty unique problem, I'd say, in Pinoy BL because, I mean, even in Catholic families, you would hear statements like they would wish that their gay children would change, they would read Bible verses, or they would force them to date heterosexual people, but only born-again Christians in the Philippines would have conversion therapy that relevant, I'd say. I mean, I used to be a born-again Christian. I mean, I gonna confess in this panel, so I'd know. Okay, so now, okay, I think I forgot one trope. So if you're familiar with gay lingo, you're gonna be familiar with the term paminta, which is in English pepper. So it evolved pretty funnily because it came from the term pamin, which is manly looking or manly acting. And then it evolved to paminta or pepper. So the local gay stereotype is that when you say that someone is bakla, the stereotype, or bakla is the Filipino term for gay. The stereotype is that you're either working at a salon or a comedian. So that's two common tropes. But Pinoy BL and all the other queer literature that came over the years are pretty revolutionary because they're trying to subvert that trope. You got here, let's say, in My Husband's Lover, we got an architect and a luxury car dealer. Then I saw this BL that has a lawyer and a doctor. And then you got here Carl's gay uncle, which has a dedicated episode in Gaya sa Pelikula. He is an engineer. Now, who wants some hotties? So I'm gonna go through these stars that you're gonna watch. So unlike the Thai BL part, I did not put them on pairs on purpose because in Pinoy BL, they, at least until recently, there's no such thing as ships or love teams. Yeah, so I wanted to focus actors based on their merit and not really because of the pairings that they had. So you got Royce Cabrera, which is one of the cast of Quarantines, and then you got Cocoy De Santos, if you're familiar with Game Boys, and Omando. And then you got here Genesis Vedido. He's a very interesting guy. He's a volleyball player, and he took the role in between and Meet Me Outside because he has a transgender sister, like a trans woman sister. And then you got here Ian Pangilinan in the movies, the guy with a really interesting English accent. Then you got here Darwin Yu, the bullied kid in My Extraordinary. And maybe you do not know this guy. He is Renshi de Guzman. He might be a new actor in the industry. He is one of the side couples in Between, and his character is written as an otaku, so I really love it. You might want to check In Between. His room is like full of Figmas, pop. What do you call that? The pop kind of dolls. You've got Harry Potter kind of stuff in his room. Yeah, Funko Pop, exactly. And Nendos. Yep, right, right. So we're about to end the panel. Good thing I'm the last to present because we're already going over time. So I often say on Twitter that Pinoy BL is a fandom and silos. Silos meaning people are in their separate fandoms, like they are in their separate kind of worlds. So I would borrow the imagery of a ballroom hall. Let's say you attend a prom or a wedding. You have all these tables around you. Maybe you're seated together with your friends. You are celebrating the same thing, but you are not interacting with each other. So that's how I describe Pinoy BL, because even though there's a lot of BL fans in the Philippines, fans of Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Thai BLs, you would not expect them to be fans of Pinoy BL at the same time. Maybe they do not even know what Pinoy BL is about. So each media has its own fandom. So everyone is celebrating the same thing, but they are not interacting, or maybe if they know each other, they do not really care because they have their own set of interests. So I'm gonna share this one. So this is how I illustrate the imagery of the ballroom. So you got the BXB writers, you got the comic artists, you got the TV and movie producers, you got what I call as the Catholic schoolgirl trope. So these are fans mainly of Western media. They might be fans of BL or Japanese pop culture in general. They're English speaking. They study at private schools, but they do not really know about local pop culture. And then you've got highbrow publishers, you got pocketbook publishers, and then all the rest of the fandom. Yeah, it's a mean girl sitting chart. So the idea is that you're gonna have like this cycle where you got novels, comics, TV, movies, you got fandoms, games, media exports, concerts maybe. You got one form of media being turned into another. But the sad fact is that Pinoy BL right now is spread around these different circles. They barely interact with each other. So unlike I'd say Thai BL, I mean, I'm just borrowing knowledge from Dr. Thomas panels. There are no Pinoy BL novel right now that has been turned into a movie or a TV series, which is very sad. So I would say that Pinoy BL is fragmented just like the rest of Philippine society. So things fans consume are influenced by their circumstances. So it could be age, income, religious beliefs, being LGBT, education, internet connection, exposure to other BL fandoms, if they're an artist or a creative, and even their politics and wokeness level, I'd say. So one big problem is that people expect Pinoy BL to be free. So I was shopping at Shopee last 6/6. So if you're a Pinoy, you know that there are sales online every month. And then you got here a title worth $2 and auspiciously sold 69 copies. And then you got here a novel that was sold for $6 and it only got 47 copies sold. So it is very sad. I mean, even in my personal experience, even if my novel was published in print, it's not really profitable for the publisher that got it. So I really wondered why they dared to pick up a Pinoy BL novel. So novels or comics in print, they do not sell profitably, even if the sticker tag is already rock bottom and the royalties are worse than peanuts. And then on the web series side, you would not expect them to earn at unleast unless they are ad supported or they have sponsors like Gaya sa Pelikula or Game Boys, which are supported by Globe Telecom, which is the largest telecom company in the country. So as you can see here, back in the Wattpad boom in the mid to late 2010s, there were hundreds and hundreds of Pinoy heterosexual novels that were printed. I mean, I got shelves upon shelves of these stories, but there were only a few that from BL that was published until recently. So there's low chances of publication in an elitist publishing industry. So highbrow publishers will ignore your work because it's in Filipino and not in English. And the mass market publishers, on the other hand, they would be more concerned about the potential revenue or if they're gonna break even or make some income out of it. And self-publishing isn't really a big thing here. Unlike when I attend like international writing workshops, I would hear Filipino authors writing in Amazon Kindle or something. It's not really that prevalent in Filipino fandom. And even if your novel or comic is published, it won't be adapted into other media unless it's a hit or you have considerable networks. So gaya sa pelikula, if I mean I don't want to speculate why it became a BL. But I know Juan Miguel Severo because he's one of the there was this clique in Tumblr in the early 2010s. So we have what you call spoken word poetry in the Philippines. So there's these lot of emerging poets and writers back then, and Juan Miguel is part of them. And then through that network, of course, he would meet a lot of other creative people that would connect him to potential media projects. So that's one advantage. And of course, Pinoy BL is still web series centric. Publishers do not know how to publish in Kindle, in EPUB. They might not have any idea about Webtoon. And even if Pinoy BL is booming, they are not taking advantage by translating it to English, which is odd because Filipinos know how to speak English. It's so cheap to get someone to translate a novel here. So there's a lack of investment, just like the rest of the entertainment industry. So if you're a writer or a comic, and if you want to make it an English-speaking fandom, might as well just go all in on your own. And also, I gotta mention colonial mentality because Filipinos are averse to their own pop culture. So we got terms like corny, OA, or overacting. And we have a term called pambalot ng tinapa or fish wrapper. So mainly it applies to novels and comics. They find Filipino literature so bad that they would rather wrap vegetables or fish on it. And so media from other countries are more accessible and preferred because that's the curse of knowing English. People would rather subscribe to Netflix, even poor working class families would likely have a shared Netflix subscription with their neighbor. So that goes for local BL fandom too. So it would be interesting once we get out of this pandemic, how Pinoy BL would impact local BL conventions such as BlushCon and Yaoi Expo. It would be very lovely to see if they're gonna guess Pinoy BL actors or producers, or if I'm gonna see Pinoy BL fan art or something. That would be very lovely. And then get ready for the last slide. I think it would be pretty controversial. So homophobia and wokeness are both harmful to fandom. I mean, I mentioned a few times that the Philippines is still predominantly Christian. So churches and religious leaders still hold sway. And of course, as I mentioned in Discord, there's no significant sex education in the Philippines. So majority of the population, unless let's say you studied at a left-wing university like the University of the Philippines or maybe Ateneo, like the biggest universities in the country, they would not know about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression or SOGI. So if you're gonna push the boundaries too far, it would boomerang back and they will be turned off by the activism. So this is one of my personal worries with Gaya sa Pelikula. Because as I was discussing it on Discord the past few days, it is a very interesting fandom because they are so loud. I'm not even sure if there was a part in Gaya sa Pelikula that demanded our president to resign. But I've seen a lot of tweets saying that they would rather have the president to be ousted before having Gaya sa Pelikula season 2. So that's very interesting because I mean the politics here are very tense right now. We got an election coming up next year. All right, so we're about to end. I'm over time by 7 minutes. So I got my wishes for Pinoy BL. So I want a resilient fandom post-pandemic. I don't want it to become a fad. And sadly, I'm already seeing some tweets that Pinoy BL web series is already in Filipino Laos. I mean, the fad is over. Like it's already been its time. So there are also novels and comics that finally getting the attention they deserve. And then you've got investments in translations and exports, more diverse storylines. I don't want to watch another Pinoy BL shot by a Zoom. And then we got, I want to wish for a physical Pinoy BL convention. Or maybe you're going to include it in like Yaoi Expo or BlushCon. Or maybe a standalone Pinoy BL convention once everyone is vaccinated. Maybe I would say it wouldn't be possible until at least next year or the next 2 years. Yeah, kind of sad. All right, so that's the end of my panel. So if you want to talk to me or you have some questions, concerns, violent reactions, just ping me on Twitter. That's Young Blue Spring. I also have an AO3 account, and then this is my Wattpad account. So if you want to check out what stuff I'm hiding, so just check out the links, okay? Yeah. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Let's go with the Q&A now.
Thank you so much. Because we are over time, if y'all will, I assume you're active on the Discord, so if are you cool with them sending you questions through there too?
Yeah, if they're in the Discord, there's the Wikang Tagalog channel there right now. So they're free to chat with me if they have any questions.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. That was a fabulous presentation. I really want to watch the Pinot BL. I know that's on Netflix, but I also really need to go to sleep. So
just before we go, I do have one more thing to say that we forgot to say at the beginning because we're turnips and sleep deprived. Can you please not personally share this outside of what's being uploaded on the FujiCon post-con sharing?
Yeah, because
whatever they're going to do.
Yeah, local Twitter has really worse cancel culture. So I don't want this to invade. I don't want this to be seen in the Twitter fandom. By the way, if you're gonna check my AO3 right now, I have a little surprise there. Yeah, maybe I could share it. Is that okay? I'm gonna share my screen again. Oops, I forgot to remove the full screen. So on AO3, I posted the first chapter of one of my novels. So I rushed translating it into English, the first chapter, so that you just get an idea what's a typical Wattpad BXB novel is like. So I hope you're gonna check it out. Or, yep, I'm good.
awesome. Well, everyone can reach out to you via Twitter or Discord. Thank you for sticking around, and I'm gonna end this so I can go to sleep. Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone. I'm gonna have my dinner now. Thank you.